The score was 42-38 for the Lakers when I felt the first twinge in my chest. It wasn't ordinary fatigue. It was something different, as if someone were squeezing his heart with increasing force. I was in the VIP stands at TD Garden in Boston, surrounded by tens of thousands of people cheering for the Celtics, when my vision began to darken at the edges. The pain radiated down my left arm like liquid fire. "Help!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the roar of the crowd celebrating a three-pointer by Jason Tatum. That's when I collapsed. My name is Tyler, and at 28 years old, I never imagined I would be fighting for my life during the most anticipated game of the season. The game I had saved up for months to buy premium tickets as a birthday present for himself. Paramedics found me unconscious between rows of seats. They said later that it was lucky it happened there, surrounded by people. Someone called 911 immediately. The stadium doctors arrived in less than 2 minutes. Acute myocardial infarction at 28 years old. The words echoed in my head when I woke up in the ICU at Massachusetts General Hospital, hooked up to machines that beeped constantly, monitoring every beat of my traitorous heart. The first thing I thought about wasn't the pain or the fear. It was my family. They must have been terrified, rushing through the hospital corridors, arguing with the nurses to see him. But when I opened my eyes fully, I found only a nurse adjusting his four. No crying mother. No worried father. Neither of my 2 sisters holding his hand. "Her family has been notified," the nurse Janet told me with a kind smile. "He should be on his way." That was Tuesday at 9 in the morning. On Wednesday at noon, still alone, I started checking my cell phone obsessively. 0 missed calls. 0 messages. Not even a "Are you okay?" on WhatsApp. It was on Thursday that I saw it. An Instagram notification. Melissa, his younger sister, had tagged him in a photo. My still fragile heart raced with hope. Finally, a show of concern, maybe a public prayer for his recovery. The photo loaded slowly on the hospital's poor internet connection. It was my entire family. My mother, Susan, smiling radiantly in a fancy restaurant. My father, Robert, toasting with a glass of red wine. Melissa and my older sister, Amanda, posing for the camera with lobster plates in front of them. The caption cut my soul deeper than any scalpel. "Family dinner to celebrate Dad's promotion. Finally, we can relax without drama and toxic people. #blessed family #peace at last #family first." They had tagged me in it. Tagged me as if I were an inside joke. As if he, struggling to survive alone in a hospital bed, were the drama that had finally been eliminated from her perfect lives. I looked at the machines around me, at the wires stuck to my chest, at the 4 drip keeping my body functioning. Then I looked again at the photo of my happy family celebrating my absence. Something broke inside me at that moment. Not physically, that had already happened during the game. Something emotional snapped with a crack so audible that I swore the machines would detect it. That's when I realized he wasn't just absent by chance. He was absent by choice. And if you're following this story of family betrayal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened after that discovery was just the beginning of a twist that would change our lives forever. Because while they were toasting my absence, I was about to discover something about my family that would make that photo on social media the least of my problems. 48 hours had passed since I saw that photo. 48 hours of absolute silence from my family, while I remained connected to heart monitors, processing the reality of my situation. It wasn't the first time they had felt my absence from family celebrations. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I realized a pattern I had ignored for years. My family had an impressive ability to disappear when I needed her most, but magically appear whenever his financial problems arose. Like when my mother, Susan, called me crying last year because his car had broken down. "Tyler, honey, you're the only one who can help me. His father is having a hard time at work." 24 hours later, I had deposited $3,500 into her account. Or when Melissa showed up at my door at 10 p.m. 3 months ago, saying he was going to be evicted if he didn't pay his rent. "You're his big brother, Tyler. Who else can I turn to?" Another $2,200 went out of his savings account. Amanda wasn't far behind. Her online clothing store was always about to take off, but needed just one more push to get there. 5 different investments over the past 2 years, totaling nearly $8,000. Investments that were never mentioned again after the deposits were made. And then there was my father, Robert, the master of financial emergencies. Tax problems, home repairs, unmissable investment opportunities that always needed immediate capital. Over the past 3 years, I had been his personal bank on at least 17 different occasions. Now, lying in this hospital bed, I did the math in my head. Between direct loans, bills I paid regularly, and family investments, I had transferred over $60,000 to him over the past 3 years. $60,000 that was never paid back. It was never even mentioned as debt. It was always family favors, or investments in our future together. But when I was literally fighting for my life, total silence. The irony hit me like a punch in the stomach. They were celebrating his father's promotion. The same promotion he got after I helped him pay off her credit card debt, so he could pass the company's financial background check. The job he got wearing the $3,000 suit I paid for because looking professional is an investment in the family's future. I started to laugh. Not out of joy, but out of sheer disbelief. A bitter laugh that made the nurses look worriedly through my room window. They weren't just absent out of cruelty. They were absent because for the first time in years, they didn't need anything from me. There were no overdue bills to pay, no financial crisis to solve, no opportunities to finance. I was useful to them only as a walking ATM. That's when my cell phone rang. Finally, I thought. Someone in the family remembering that I exist. The name on the screen made me smile for the first time in days. Grandpa Henry. Henry Chun, my 82-year-old paternal grandfather, the only person in my family who had never asked me for a penny. The man who had built a small fortune with a hardware store and smart investments, but who had always lived simply and modestly. Tyler, boy, I just heard about his heart. I'm on my way over right now. Her voice, though hoarse with age, carried more genuine concern than I had heard from any member of her family in the past 2 years. Grandpa, you don't need to drive all the way to Boston. Everything's fine here. Nonsense. I'm already on my way. And Tyler? Yes, sir. Have you talked to your parents about what happened? The silence stretched out for several seconds. I see, he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he understood much more than I realized. I'll be there in 2 hours. 2 hours and 15 minutes later, Henry Chun entered my room like a gust of concentrated determination. At 82, he still moved with the confidence of someone who had faced real adversity and emerged victorious. He hugged me tightly, then stepped back to examine me with eyes that remained sharp despite her age. You look terrible, little girl. But you're alive, and that's what matters. He pulled up a chair next to my bed and sat down, studying me with the intensity of someone reading between the lines. Now tell me, where are his parents? Her sisters? The simple question broke something inside me. For 3 days, I had tried to rationalize his absence, to find excuses, to imagine that maybe he just didn't know how to help me in a medical emergency. But the presence of my grandfather, who had driven 2 hours through a snowstorm to be here, made it impossible to keep pretending. I showed him the Instagram photo. Henry studied the image for a long time, her expression gradually hardening. When she finally spoke, her voice carried decades of contained disappointment. Tyler, how long have you been financially supporting this family? The question caught me off guard. I'm not supporting anyone, Grandpa. I just help out when they need it. And how often do they need it, I started to answer automatically, but stopped myself. When I really thought about it, the frequency was staggering. Pretty much every month, I finally admitted. Henry nodded slowly, as if a long-held suspicion had been confirmed. His father called me last week, Tyler, asking about wills, inheritances, if I had thought about the future of the family. It was the first time he had called me in 6 months. My stomach sank. He didn't know about my heart attack when he called her, did he? No. The call was 3 days before your Celtics game. The silence that followed was loaded with implications that none of us wanted to verbalize. My grandfather leaned forward, her voice low but firm. Tyler, they know you're in the hospital. Massachusetts General has strict protocols. They called all of your emergency contacts on the first day. Then why? Because he assumed you'd recover on your own, like you always do. And because, for the first time in years, they don't need her for anything immediate. The words hit like a brutal but accurate medical diagnosis. Henry continued, "Meanwhile, they're celebrating a promotion that was only possible because you paid off his father's debts. Using money he worked 60 hours a week to earn." He paused, letting the reality sink in completely. "Tyler, you're not his son. You're his retirement plan." At that moment, something fundamental changed inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but a crystal-clear clarity about the true nature of my family relationships. And as my grandfather continued to watch me with eyes that had seen many battles, I realized that he wasn't just paying a social call. He was offering me something I never knew I needed, the truth. And perhaps, an ally for what was to come. Because if they wanted to treat me like a bank, it was time to learn how banks operate when the payments stop coming in. Over the next 48 hours, as I recovered under the attentive care of the medical staff, Henry remained by my side like a silent guard. He had brought his laptop and a bulky folder that he didn't open in front of her, but occasionally consulted when he thought she was asleep. On the third day of her presence, my cell phone began to ring incessantly. The first call came from Melissa at 6:43 a.m. Then Amanda, 10 minutes later. Next my mother, Susan, with a strangely sweet voice I hadn't heard in months. "Tyler, honey, we heard you're in the hospital. Why didn't you tell us? We're all very worried." I looked at Henry, who was drinking his coffee and watching my reaction with clinical interest. "How did you find out?" I asked her, my voice still hoarse from the medication. "Well, Amanda ran into a friend who works at the hospital. We're coming to visit you this afternoon." The call ended, and Henry put her cup down. "Interesting timing," he muttered. 3 days after your heart attack, they find out where you are. Right after the bank called her house last night." "What bank?" Henry opened his briefcase and took out a stack of documents. "Tyler, while you've been recovering, I took the liberty of doing some checking. You've authorized automatic transfers from her account to 5 different people. The total monthly amount is $3,800. My stomach sank. I knew I helped my family, but I had never calculated the total. Last night, the bank tried to process the routine transfers. Her account was temporarily frozen due to her hospitalization, standard protocol for medical emergencies. They called all the beneficiaries to inform them of the delay. The clarity hit me like a bolt of lightning. He wasn't coming because he finally cared about me. He was coming because the money had stopped flowing. Henry continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Tyler, how long have you been a co-signer on your parents' mortgage?" 3 years. They said they needed someone with better credit to refinance. "And Melissa's checking account?" 2 years. "For emergencies," she said. "And you pay Amanda's life insurance, don't you?" "How do you know that?" Henry laid the documents in front of me. "Because I hired a private investigator last week. After his call about inheritance, I began to suspect there was more going on than he was letting on. The papers showed an intricate web of financial dependency. I wasn't just helping my family out occasionally. I was literally the financial pillar that supported his entire lifestyle. The house my parents lived in, mortgage in my name as the primary co-signer. The car Melissa drove, loan secured by me. Amanda's online business expansion, business loan with my signature. Even the family's health insurance was being partially subsidized by monthly transfers I had authorized 2 years ago during a temporary emergency my mother had." "Tyler," Henry said softly, "you're not his son. You're his personal bank." At that moment, my cell phone rang again. It was my father, Robert. "Tyler, son, how are you? We just heard about your hospitalization. What a terrible scare." Her voice carried a performative concern I recognized from the times he needed money. "I'm recovering, Dad." That's good, that's good. Listen, Tyler, we had some problems with bank transfers yesterday. Could you take a look at that when you're feeling better? Nothing urgent, of course, but..." The sentence hung in the air, laden with expectation. "Dad, why didn't you come see me when you found out I was in the hospital?" A silence stretched out for several seconds. "Well, Tyler, we didn't want to bother him while he was recovering. We know how much he values his privacy." It was such a transparent lie that it almost made me laugh. "But yesterday you posted a photo celebrating at the most expensive restaurant in town." "Oh, that. It was just a little celebration for the promotion. We didn't want to seem insensitive posting during her situation. You tagged me in the photo, Dad. Another silence. Longer this time. Tyler, you sound a little stressed. Maybe the medication is affecting your judgment. When you're feeling better, we can talk about all this. The call ended and I stared at the phone in my hands. Henry leaned forward. Tyler, can I ask you something? When was the last time his family gave him something? Not lent him something, not promised him something in the future, but actually gave him something without expecting anything in return. I searched my memory. Birthdays where I received cards with generic messages. Christmases where my gifts were clearly bought at the last minute, usually practical items like socks or toiletries. I can't remember, I admitted. And when was the last time he asked for her financial help? Last week. Amanda needed capital to expand the online store's inventory. How much did you give her? $4,500. Henry made a note. And did her mention the loan when she posted about his father's promotion celebration? No. Or when she found out you were hospitalized? No. Henry closed the folder and looked me straight in the eye. Tyler, they've turned you into a means of subsistence. And now that the money has stopped flowing, they're desperate. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? For the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than physical pain or emotional confusion. I felt anger. Not explosive anger, but a cold, calculated anger that started in the center of his chest and spread like ice through his veins. Grandpa, I said, my voice firmer than it had been since the heart attack, show me exactly what you found out about him. Henry smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of a man who had waited decades to have this conversation. First, you need to know that this isn't just about money, Tyler. It's about control. And lies. Lots of lies. He opened a second folder, this one much thicker. Her sister Melissa isn't trying to settle down like she always says. She has 2 secret bank accounts with over $40,000 in each. Money that should have been used to pay off the debts you helped her cover. My stomach clenched. Amanda isn't struggling to get the business off the ground. She has a luxury apartment in Chicago that her parents don't know about, financed by the investments you made in her shell company. And my parents? Oh, Tyler. Your parents are the worst of all. Henry pulled out a series of bank statements. Your father's promotion? It didn't happen last week. It happened 6 months ago. His salary increased by 80%. But they continued to pretend they were struggling financially to keep her monthly transfers going. I felt like I was having another heart attack. And there's more. Your mother wasn't just celebrating the promotion at that dinner. She was celebrating because the investigator he hired confirmed that you don't have a will. If something happened to him, all his assets, including her share of his grandfather's future inheritance, would go to her as his next closest relative. The words hit like physical blows. He was celebrating the possibility of my death? Tyler, he was celebrating the possibility of finally having complete access to his money without having to fake emergencies or invent needs. At that moment, the bedroom door opened. It was Amanda, smiling from ear to ear, carrying a bouquet of flowers obviously purchased at the hospital gift shop. Tyler. My God, you look terrible. Why didn't you tell us you were sick? She stopped abruptly when she saw Henry and the documents scattered on the table next to my bed. Grandpa Henry? What are you doing here? Taking care of my grandson, Henry replied calmly. Something that seems to have been forgotten by her family. Amanda looked nervously at the papers, trying to read what was written upside down. Tyler, honey, you need to rest. Maybe Grandpa could come back another day? Immediate family should have priority during recovery, right? It was at that moment that something inside me completely crystallized. I looked at Amanda, who was blatantly trying to manipulate me even while I was hooked up to heart monitors, then at Henry, who had driven through a storm to be by my side when no one else cared. Amanda, I said, my voice perfectly calm, how much money do you owe me? What? Money. Loans. Investments. How much does he owe me? She laughed nervously. Tyler, you're confused. We are family. Family doesn't charge family. Answer the question. Henry discreetly placed the bank statements where Amanda could see them clearly. $23,470, he said calmly. over the last 18 months. Amanda's smile vanished instantly. Tyler, you can't be thinking about, this is ridiculous. That money helped the whole family. You benefited too. How exactly did it benefit him, Amanda? Well, the family. The family that posted photos celebrating while I was dying alone in this hospital? Amanda looked desperately at the door, clearly searching for a way out. Tyler, you're being manipulated. Grandpa Henry has always been jealous of our closeness. He's trying to destroy our family. It was the wrong statement at the wrong time. I sat up in bed, ignoring the pain in my chest, and looked directly into my sister's eyes. Amanda, I want you to get out of my room. Now. Tyler. Get out. And tell Melissa and our parents that I don't want to see them. Not today, not tomorrow, not until I decide what to do with this family. After Amanda left, hurried and visibly shaken, Henry and I sat in silence for several minutes. Tyler, he finally said, you have an important decision to make. What? Whether you just want his money back, or if you want them to face real consequences for what they did to her. I looked out the hospital window, watching normal city life go on outside, while his own life had been turned upside down by the calculated cruelty of people who were supposed to love him. Grandpa, I said, my voice carrying a determination I hadn't felt in years, show me exactly how I can do both. Henry smiled and opened a third folder. Well, he said, it's going to take some planning. But Tyler, when we're done, they're going to understand exactly what it means to lose everything they built at the expense of someone they loved. In that moment, realizing for the first time in years that I had someone truly on his side, I began to understand that my recovery would not be just physical. It would be a complete recovery. Of my dignity, my money, and most importantly, my ability to distinguish between real love and exploitation disguised as family love. Because while they thought they had defeated me with her cruel indifference, they had actually just awakened something they didn't know existed, a Tyler who was finally ready to fight back. And this time, I wouldn't fight alone. Over the next 2 days, Henry turned my hospital room into a silent command center. He brought in his accountant, his lawyer, and even a private investigator he had hired weeks earlier. Tyler, he said, opening a new laptop on the table next to my bed, we're going to do this methodically. No impulsive moves, no emotions. Just logical consequences for selfish actions. The first task was to map out my financial situation completely. What we discovered was even more devastating than I had imagined. It wasn't just $60,000. It was $87,462 over 3 years. Direct loans, co-signatures, automatic transfers, bills that were being paid temporarily by his 2-year-old credit card. Tyler, you're not his son, Henry repeated, studying the numbers. You're a personal loan company he's been exploiting without ever signing a contract. The lawyer, Morrison, a bald 50-year-old man with an intimidating reputation, began explaining our legal options. Legally, he has the right to cancel all automatic transfers immediately. The co-signatures can be contested if we can prove emotional coercion or false information at the time of signing. And can we? I asked. Morrison smiled coldly. Tyler, her family has documented their own greed on social media. We have posts of expensive vacations right after you co-signed loans for emergencies. We have evidence of multiple secret bank accounts. That's called fraud. Henry nodded. But first, let's stop the financial bleeding completely. Over the next few hours, we meticulously canceled everything. Automatic transfers, additional cards, access to joint accounts. We changed passwords, removed authorizations, canceled co-signatures where legally possible. What comes next is going to be interesting, Henry muttered, checking his phone. Her mother has called me 3 times in the last 2 hours. What did she want? Information about you. Where you are, how your recovery is going, whether you are making rational decisions during your hospitalization. Morrison chuckled softly. They're panicking. The transfers that depended on it weren't processed today. I'd bet all the additional cards were declined at the last minute. That's when his phone started ringing incessantly. First Melissa, Tyler, there's something wrong with his account. Can you check it? Then Amanda, his card was declined at Whole Foods. This is embarrassing. Fix it. Then my mother, Tyler honey, I need to talk to you urgently about some banking issues. Finally, my father, Tyler, her irresponsible actions are hurting the entire family. Call him immediately. I ignored all the calls. Henry, I said, feeling a clarity I hadn't experienced in years, I want them to face real consequences. Not just lose access to my money. Consequences that make them understand what they've done. Henry smiled. Tyler, do you want justice or revenge? I want the truth to come out publicly. And I want back every penny they stole from me. Then let's use his own weapons against him. The plan we developed over the next few hours was elegant in its simplicity. First, we would sue him for all unpaid loans, using evidence of her actual income to prove her ability to pay. Second, we would contest all co-signatures based on false information provided at the time of signing. Third, and most devastating, we would publicly expose his hypocrisy using her own social media posts. Tyler, Morrison explained, he created a public narrative of financial hardship while living lavishly off his money. That's not just morally questionable, it's potentially fraudulent in some contexts. Henry added, and we have something they don't know we have. Complete records of all transfers, screenshots of all contradictory posts, and witnesses to her lies. But the most satisfying part of the plan involved her own social media. He used Instagram to humiliate me while I was dying in the hospital, I said. We're going to use the truth to show exactly who he really is. Henry had documented everything. Photos of his family at expensive restaurants the same week they asked for money for emergencies. Posts about vacations to Miami while I was paying their mortgage. Celebrations of promotions that happened months earlier, while they pretended to be struggling financially. The internet doesn't forgive documented hypocrisy, Morrison noted. Especially when it involves family exploitation. If it is his case that he is following this journey of discovery and transformation, subscribe to the channel, because what happened when we implemented this plan went beyond our wildest expectations. That night, Henry stayed at the hospital. Not because I needed additional medical care, but because we wanted to be together when the first waves of shock hit my family. Tyler, he said, adjusting the cushions on the chair where she would sleep, tomorrow will be the first day of her new life. A life where she is no longer a personal bank for people who confuse generosity with weakness. I looked out the hospital window, watching the city lights come on one by one. Grandpa, why did you decide to help me now? Did you always know what he was like? Henry sighed deeply. Tyler, I lost his father to greed a long time ago. I'm not going to lose you too. And as for knowing, yes, I knew. But sometimes people need to discover the truth for themselves before they're ready to act. And now I'm ready. Now you are free. The next morning, we would begin the implementation. And while my family, his probably sleeping, unaware of the hurricane that was about to hit their carefully constructed lives at his expense, I finally slept peacefully for the first time in years. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about destruction. It's about revealing the truth in a way that makes denial impossible and change inevitable. The first explosion happened on Monday at 8 in the morning. Melissa called 27 times in 15 minutes. When I finally answered, his voice was 2 octaves higher than normal. Tyler, what the hell did you do? My account is frozen. The bank is saying something about a fraud investigation. Good morning to you too, Melissa. Don't give me sarcasm. I need that money today. I have bills to pay. How interesting. Bills to pay with the money you said would be returned in 2 weeks. That was 8 months ago. Henry, sitting next to me in the hospital room, took notes while I put the call on speakerphone. Tyler, you can't just cut off his access like this. We're family. Family, I repeated slowly. Like when you posted that photo celebrating while I was in the ICU? A deadly silence filled the line. That was a misunderstanding. We didn't know. Melissa, you tagged him in the photo. With a caption about finally having peace without drama. While he was hooked up to machines monitoring every beat of his heart. Tyler, you're being dramatic. No, Melissa. Dramatic was finding out that his 2 secret accounts with over $40,000 each, money that should have been used to pay off the debts I covered for him. The silence stretched on for several seconds. Who told you that? Public records are fascinating, aren't they? Especially when you cross-reference tax returns with bank records. Melissa hung up abruptly. Henry smiled. 1 for 4. I think the next calls will be more interesting. He was right. Amanda called 30 minutes later, her voice shaking with anger. Tyler, you've destroyed my business. My suppliers are canceling contracts because my line of credit has been revoked. Amanda, his business never existed. It was a front to launder the money he received from me. That's a lie. $43,000 in investments over the last 2 years. 0 reported sales. But somehow you managed to buy a luxury apartment in Chicago. How do you know about Chicago? Because I hired a private investigator. Did you really think posting photos from $1 million penthouse while claiming your business was struggling would go unnoticed forever? The call ended with another abrupt hang-up. My parents took longer to call. When they finally did, it was my mother, her voice heavy with a cold anger I had rarely heard before. Tyler, you are destroying this family because of some kind of mental breakdown. We need to talk in person. There's nothing to talk about, Mom. You are making a terrible mistake. Cancel all those transfers, making false accusations. False? Mom, you were celebrating because you thought I might die and you'd have complete access to his money without having to fake any more emergencies. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then why did you hire an investigator to check if he had a will? Total silence. Tyler, she finally said, her voice now carefully controlled, you need professional help. These paranoid fantasies. Mom, I have copies of the emails you sent to the lawyer asking about intestate succession. I have records of the calls to the insurance company asking about life insurance policies. I have evidence of everything. The call ended without a word. Henry checked his watch. Phase 2 of 3-2-1. My cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Tyler? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We've received some interesting information about his family and would like to ask you a few questions. Henry nodded approvingly. He had contacted Jennifer 3 days earlier, providing her with a complete timeline of the financial exploitation, along with supporting documentation. I'd be happy to talk to you, Jennifer. Excellent. We're particularly interested in the discrepancy between her family's social media posts and her claims of financial hardship. Some of the evidence we've received is quite compelling. 10 minutes later, my phone exploded. Melissa, what the fuck is this TV interview? Amanda, Tyler, stop this now or you'll regret it. My father, if he talks to any journalists, he'll never be welcome in this family again. I ignored all the messages. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the live report aired. Jennifer Walsh stood in front of the hospital, reporting the story with the clinical precision of a seasoned journalist. A family in Boston is facing allegations of financial exploitation after allegedly draining more than $87,000 from a family member over a 3-year period. The man, who suffered a heart attack during a Celtics game, claims that her family celebrated his hospitalization on social media while refusing to visit him. The screen showed screenshots of the Instagram photo, including the caption "Family Day without the drama," and timestamps proving it was posted while I was in the ICU. Documents obtained by Channel 7 show a pattern of financial transfers from the victim to several family members, including co-signatures on loans and mortgages, often under the pretext of temporary emergencies. The report included interviews with financial experts explaining how predatory families operate, using emotional manipulation to maintain constant access to vulnerable members' resources. But the most devastating part came when Jennifer showed the timeline. Records show that several alleged financial emergencies occurred during the same period that family members posted about expensive vacations, dinners at luxury restaurants, and significant purchases. Screenshots appeared on the screen. Melissa in Miami 2 weeks after I covered his late rent. Amanda with designer handbags in the same month. He invested $4,000 in his struggling business. My parents toasting at a 5-star restaurant 3 days after I paid her late mortgage. The report ended with a powerful statement. Channel 7 contacted the family for comment. He declined to respond. However, sources close to the investigation suggest that legal aspects are being considered, including possible wire fraud and elder financial abuse statutes that may apply. My phone didn't stop ringing for the rest of the day. But the calls weren't just from his family. Cousins, uncles, family acquaintances, all calling to express shock and support. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reaching out to say they had always suspected something was wrong. Amanda's ex-girlfriend called to tell stories about how Amanda always had money despite claiming her business was failing. A neighbor of my parents mentioned that they had recently had their driveway completely redone and wondered where they got the money. Momentum was building, and my family was discovering that their carefully constructed narrative was unraveling in real time. At 8 p.m., my father showed up at the hospital. He wasn't on the approved visitor list, so security stopped him in the lobby. But he started yelling loud enough that I could hear her through the walls. "Tyler, come out and talk to me like a man." Henry called security, but before they could escort him out, he managed to shout one last threat. "You're going to pay for this. You're destroying 40 years of relationships. No one is going to believe her." That's when Henry quietly handed me his tablet, showing me the local Twitter trending topics. Hashtag Boston Family Fraud was trending in 3rd place. Hashtag Celtics Cardiac Scan was trending in 5th. People weren't just believing me. They were amplifying the story, sharing her own experiences with family financial abuse, and turning my family into a cautionary tale. That night, as Henry quietly reviewed legal documents beside me, I received one last message. It was from my mother. "Tyler, please, can we resolve this privately? The whole family is suffering." I looked over at Henry, who was watching me calmly. "Tyler," he said softly, "justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about ensuring that the harm stops." "And you think the harm has stopped?" "I think," he said, "that they finally understand that you are no longer his personal ATM, and that the whole world now knows exactly who they really are." I stared at her mother's message for a long time. Then, for the first time since I woke up in this hospital, I typed a response that came directly from my heart. "The suffering you're feeling now is a fraction of what I felt for years. The difference is that his suffering has an end date. Mine was supposed to last forever." There was no reply. And as the lights of Boston twinkled through the hospital window, I realized that true victory wasn't in destroying he. It was in finally, after years of being invisible, becoming someone who could not be ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted ever again. Because tomorrow, when the legal consequences really began, they would learn that sometimes the quietest person in the room is also the most dangerous. 6 months later, sitting on the porch of our cabin in the mountains of Colorado, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Morrison, my lawyer. "Tyler, the case is over. We were able to recover $73,000 through settlements." His family chose not to go to trial. Justice had been served, but the real victory wasn't in the money recovered. Melissa lost her sponsorships and shut down all her social media accounts after being exposed. Amanda had to sell her apartment in Chicago and move back in with her parents. My father was fired permanently after the company found out about the lies on his background check. My mother had to get a job for the first time in 20 years. They lost their home, their reputation, and most importantly, they lost control over me. Henry and I built a simple but genuine life. He taught me how to fish, how to cook her mother's recipes, and most importantly, how to distinguish between people who loved me for who I am versus what I could give them. "Tyler," he said one morning as he was making coffee in the rustic kitchen, "the greatest revenge is not destroying those who hurt you. It's building a life so good that they become irrelevant to your happiness." I started a remote engineering consulting job, earning more than I ever had supporting my family. Without the financial leeches, I found I could live comfortably working fewer hours. I made new friends in town, people who knew me for my character, not my bank account. Relationships based on real reciprocity, not unilateral need. The last message I received from my family was from Melissa, 8 months after our breakup. "Tyler, I understand now what we did. If his forgiveness is possible." I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I forgave for my own peace, but that didn't make them safe again. The real lesson of this journey wasn't about revenge, but about self-worth. For years, I confused love with usefulness. I thought that being needed meant being loved. But true love doesn't charge a maintenance fee. Henry showed me that every day. He loved me without needing anything in return, supported me without a hidden agenda, and was there for me without expecting anything in return. If this story touched him, if she recognizes patterns of exploitation in her own life, subscribe to the channel for more stories of transformation and personal growth. Because sometimes, The people who should protect us the most are exactly the ones we need to protect ourselves from. Last week, Henry and I watched the sunset in the mountains, drinking coffee made without ulterior motives. "Do you miss his family?" he asked. "I miss the family I thought I had," I replied. "But I don't miss the exploitation that it really was." That's the difference between nostalgia and reality. Today, my life is simpler but infinitely richer. Because I discovered that peace is better than being loved by people who only love you when you're useful to them.